Okay, good morning, everybody. We're just doing a little live inking this morning. I'm going to pull up my desktop here. I've got my desktop camera on, and I was penciling out some pages of diary comics. So this is a project I'm working on as part of Comics Camp 2020 and bigger projects too, but you can get more information over at merrickbennett.com. So diary comics are, I draw my diary comics to draw things that I want to remember. When things happen to me, or I have little adventures that I want to remember, sometimes I'll encode them as diary comics. I always draw myself as a little rabbit because I don't want to get into too much detail about what I look like. I want to just kind of draw what I feel like. Oftentimes I feel like a little rabbit wandering around, running from story to story. So this is a story I've been working on. It's kind of a mixture of diary comics and history, local history. So I'm going to draw Rabbit sitting here in the grass. And Rabbit has been exploring local graveyards. So here I'll put my pen. I usually cartoon this marker because it's bigger and easier to draw. And I'm just going to ink. I have a couple pages penciled out here, and I'm going to ink them today. And I'm thinking about local stories and how we draw things that happen to us and to other people. And I'm thinking about it because tonight we have a reading at Gibson's bookstore in Concord, but it's a virtual reading, 7 p.m. tonight, 7 to 8. And I'm going to read from my travel comic, Sharjah Sketchbook. It's my newest book. I'm really excited to share it. And it's kind of all of a piece. You know, when you draw diary comics, wherever you go, you're in a comic. So here I am in the local graveyard, looking at a grave. This is where the story starts. We're going into the graveyard, looking at a grave. This is a veteran's grave, so we'll put a flag here. And I say it's all of a piece because, you know, drawing these diary comics, you know, this whole book came out of a travel adventure I was lucky enough to have in United Arab Emirates. And I just drew all the people I met, all the things that happened, and we're going to talk about that tonight. So today we are in my hometown of Henniker, New Hampshire at Center Cemetery. If you're in Henniker or near Henniker, I recommend walking around in this graveyard. There's so many amazing graves. The thing with graves, good morning, Simon. Simon says, good morning. Good to see you out here. The thing with graves, as you probably know, is I think of gravestones as like the dust jacket of a novel, right? It just gives you a hint. It's like the about the author or the back cover of a novel. Let me put some text on here. I keep coming back to this one particular gravesite. So here I am, I've come back to it. I'm sitting at it. There we go. Little diary comic. As I learned in Sharjah Sketchbook, it can be more powerful sometimes to leave faces off. I think we addressed that around here in the book, leaving faces off as a way of storytelling. So I think I'll leave Rabbit's face blank here. I don't want the reader looking at Rabbit. I want the reader coming back to this gravesite and studying that. So that's my focus there. Now, when I do diary comics, I use boxes. I use these panels as a way to kind of break up the information. And I find it really helps me if I have like a structure. So I'm using a structure. I'll show you the structure I used to pencil this out. Here's my structure. All I did was I folded a piece of paper up into 8 sections in half and half and in half again. And I drew lines on all those folds. So that gives me a 4x4 grid. Then I actually measured thirds, a little over a couple inches. So that's an even third. And I drew lines on those thirds. So here, I'm actually doing 2 pages on one. I'm thinking of this as a book that opens up like this, and each page has 3 levels. And as you read down, you get 3 ideas. You come to this page, you get 3 more ideas. That's my plan anyways. Use these boxes to break a big idea down into 3. So I keep coming back to this gravesite and asking, I'll make these words a little bigger as I ink them. Who is? And this is the grave of Jeremiah Crocker. Now, you might have heard of Jeremiah Crocker, you might not have. I grew up here in town, and I must have gone thousands of times past this one gravesite as a kid, riding my bike, playing baseball, and never stopped and learned his name or learned his story. And I'm really curious about that now. The thing is, like a lot of these historical people I study, I have no idea what he looked like. So I'm just using sort of a symbolic tricorn hat here. I think I'm going to leave his face blank. Sort of connects it with Rabbit's face too. Who is this guy? I have no idea what he looked like. No idea what his facial expression would be in any picture. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to draw him. But this is part of this project, is diary projects, especially diary comics, is just figuring it out as you go. And the solution of that problem, like, how do I draw this thing, this complicated thing that happened to me? How do I cartoon it? Solving that problem for me is like part of it's the process of diary comics. Because if you already know how to draw it, like, why draw it? You want to discover something. We'll talk about that tonight. The process I found as I made Sharjah sketchbook, as I drew every page of this book, the act of drawing changed the adventure I was having, changed the conversations I was having with people. Often I was drawing it as we spoke. So it really literally did affect, the act of drawing affects your relationship with these people and places. I keep coming back to this gravesite and asking, who is Jeremiah Crocker? I'm going to put a 3rd box down here in the bottom. I'm doing this on a clipboard, so it's a little more mobile. Remember how I've been saying all summer long for Comics Camp 2, leave frames around your page. I'm leaving a really narrow frame here. I don't recommend a frame this narrow. Remember, I recommend a frame at least a finger thick. But because I'm the one who's scanning these pages, I'm going to scan them and be very careful with them. And I can get away with that. And I keep coming back to this gravesite and asking, who is Jeremiah Crocker? Here I was going to have more words, but I think I'm just going to leave one other question here. Because this is the other question I'm asking. I'm going to draw myself in here. Now Rabbit's going to have a face, like a blank, thoughtful face. Like the mouth to one side. Because I think I realized I was getting really interested in who this historical person was. And then I went back to, oh my goodness, I just thought of that Frederick Douglass quote. Where's our Frederick Douglass quote? Oh yeah, we were drawing this around 4th of July. My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and his cause is the ever living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and future. And I keep thinking, why am I so interested, so curious about who this Jeremiah Crocker is? Because I think his story in this small town where I grew up in Henniker will really have a lot to teach us about who this town is, who we are in this town. This all started with this project started with a Brian Stevenson interview I heard that made me just think, wait a minute, what is the local New England history of slavery, and how does that fit into these stories we tell about ourselves and our towns? And who is we? Who's telling the stories? And who belongs to this town, and the sense of belonging? I mean, this maybe I should show you. This would make sense more if I show you what I drew of this gravestone. So here's my drawing. of Jeremiah Crocker's gravestone from Center Cemetery in Henniker, New Hampshire. Jeremiah Crocker, a colored man, a soldier of the Revolution, died June 14th, 1836, age about 100 years. So there, that's the stone that I'm looking at there. And this is, and this diary comic is going to be the story. I'm not sure where it's going to end, but it's the story of asking these questions. Let's see, we'll do a couple more panels. And that's why I thought this would be a good thing to live ink this morning, because with tonight's reading, we're going to read tonight at 7, Sharjah Sketchbook. I'll post a link in the about for this video. Thought this would be a good one to do this morning, because that was my whole approach with drawing Sharjah Sketchbook as a travel memoir, just asking questions, listening to people. This gravestone is the cover of an unwritten novel. That's the idea I like to think of with these. I'm going to move these words a little as I ink on the fly. Make this one a little bigger. I think it's unwritten. This is my assumption starting out. I have not uncovered a Revolutionary War diary of Jeremiah Crocker, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It could be somewhere. Maybe he did write down his story, but I haven't seen it yet. So I'm trying to excavate, explore, and figure out what his story is. And there's our first clue. Somebody saw fit to carve on this gravestone. Let me just put this line on here. My penciling kind of hints at where I want things, but I move things around as we go. Somebody saw fit to carve on this gravestone a little bit of a description of Jeremiah Crocker. Not only that he was 100 years old, not only that he died on this date, not only that he was a veteran of the Revolution, he was an African-American man, or at least a non-white, whatever this term means in 1836. He's in the census, it turns out, as a free non-white person by then. So then I got this idea. Let me just finish this panel and I'll show you the next step. I'm thinking I'm gonna change the wording a little bit. Hey, German Fazbear. We've got a couple people watching here. Feel free to comment and ask questions, folks. It's nice to have people stopping by. I'm just here inking, hanging out. Nice to see you. And Simon says, oh, you're very good at promoting yourself. Oh, thank you, sir. Well, I have my friends to compliment me and encourage me. Personally, I loved your Nicaragua book and loved your Slovakia Fall in the Heart of Europe. Oh, thank you, Simon. I've been thinking about Slovakia a lot. That's my book of family stories from Eastern Europe that I collected on site. Whoops, I'll fix that E when I scan this. I've been thinking about that Slovakia book a lot because I spent some time in graveyards there poking around. And I learned by doing that it's hard to ink very carefully and formulate a thought sometimes. I guess I ran out of room to do that last line, so we'll just hint at it. I learned by doing Slovakia that especially in graveyards or any kind of local history, you have to ask, like, what do I see? What am I looking at? And then, especially around, Eastern Europe, New England, anywhere in the world, you have to ask, what do I not see? That's like I say here, the gravestone's the cover of an unwritten novel, because this gravestone really just outlines a character, gives you a couple data points, And maybe if this person wrote down their story or a historian's done the work, maybe we have more. But it's such a tantalizing hint. And there's so much we don't see all around this, all around on the very ground, it turns out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So here's our first clue. Because his gravestone identified him as non-white, I realized we could go to a record like Glenn Knobloch's awesome book, Strong and Brave Fellows, New Hampshire's Black Soldiers and Sailors of the American Revolution. So it turns out, I want to promote other people's books too. It turns out, let's see, over 200 African-American men. And there's always the question of any women. Maybe not in the official records, but we can't rule that out. But at least in the records, African-American men from New Hampshire served in the Revolution. And that's a broad definition of from New Hampshire. Glenn Knobloch's book here, Strong and Brave Fellows, has a chapter of men who lived in New Hampshire, either free or enslaved in New Hampshire before the Revolution, who served in the war, or men who were not from New Hampshire, who were not born here but served in the war for New Hampshire units or for other states' units, or people who served in the war and later came to New Hampshire. It's a pretty broad definition of from New Hampshire, but he documents over 200 of them. And all we can say is at least there are that many, right? There could be more. And sometimes we don't see these histories. Simon asks, how much do I have in mind when you start to do this inking? Well, Simon, I don't know if it's clear. If you can see, I loosely penciled out what I want there. I loosely penciled out, this is going to say Glenn Knobloch's awesome book, because I'm such a fan of Glenn's, just the fact that he did all this research and wrote it down and put it together into a book so people like me don't have to do that. We can just find this stuff. So we can just find the stuff in here. I turned to the chapter of men who served. I found Crocker. Here's actually a photo of his gravestone. I found Crocker Jeremiah in the chapter of men who served in Massachusetts regiments and later moved to New Hampshire, because it turns out that's his story. So Simon, I basically have the wording, most of these pages, I basically have the wording penciled in. And as you can see, I'm improvising and making some changes as we go, because sometimes you get the ink down and things don't quite fit and you have to move things around. I can always pull out my pencil and go back to that replanning stage. Remember, PIE, pencil, ink, erase, P-I-E. Now, a couple times in this comic, I'm going to rely on photos. I'm thinking I'll do a quick snapshot of the cover of this book. And then when I scan this in, I'll drop the cover in here, maybe at a jaunty angle, so you can sort of see a book in my comic. And if that doesn't look right, I'll come back and I'll ink in a cover and just write the title and author name on it. I'll sort of play that by ear and see what works. This is one thing I like to do with my diary comics. Is I just kind of, there has to be some element of speed, not haste, but speed, not winging it, but making it up as you go within a structure, right? And the structure helps you get the ideas in order. And luckily, we can draw some details. And I like the double meaning of draw in all this, like draw as in pull out, extract, or call to us, summon. And draw, obviously, as draw. Luckily, we can draw some details from that historical record. Trying not to, I don't want to be too nerdy here. I want to sort of show the process of finding sources and putting together clues, because this is a project. I don't know where this is going, but we're going to put together some clues and figure out who Jeremiah Crocker was and is, and what it tells us about who we are, how his story has been told throughout town history for the past over 200 years. That's what gets me interested in this. That's what I was doing in Slovakia too, in that book. And that's really what I'm doing in all my diary comics, you know, in my more recent ones too. Oh, German says, how are you able to make such perfect lines without a ruler? Well, two techniques, I think. Practice, but also remember, I'm laying my page over a guide, and these lines are not straight. I didn't make them with a ruler. I just traced the folds of the paper, right? And that gives me my basic guide. So from there, you can see they're not quite straight. They're a little crooked, but I like that look. I like how my boxes kind of scrunch and sag. It just looks a little more human, you know, rather than perfectly square computerized boxes. That to me is a nice feature of comics throughout history. Newspaper comics were the only handwritten part of the newspaper, right? And there's something really personal in that. The other technique, an old trick I learned from an art school friend, is if you have to draw a wide line this way, well, your hand kind of curves because of the way your joints work. But if you turn the page, you'll see me turn the page and draw it this way. And there my hand can move in a straight line. So sometimes you can get straight lines that way too. Just make sure you're doing the straight line towards yourself, not away, because that pushes the pen, but dragging the pen. And that's a technique for long straight lines without a ruler. But if you're really concerned about getting it straight, you know, it's okay to use a ruler. I want to draw a rabbit sort of with a piece of paper scrunched up to draw on. Maybe he's drawing some boxes onto that paper. Do the tabletop here. These are all penciled in here. I'm following my pencil lines. We'll do the pages of Glenn's book. I have an autographed copy because I'm a local history nerd, right? I went to Glenn's. You can go to Glenn's talks, and he gives a great talk on this from New Hampshire Humanities. Yay, New Hampshire Humanities. And you can get an autographed copy of his awesome book. Thank goodness he's doing this scholarship, and so many other people are doing scholarship like this, collecting all this information. So the next piece in this little diary comic is actually a little breakout few pages where I trace Jeremiah Crocker's career, because more than just knowing he was a soldier of the Revolution, there's a couple pages that Glenn has written about the details based on his pension records and things like that. Actually, I've drawn those already. So they're going to look like this. And it turns out he was enslaved in Massachusetts before the war. And beyond that, I'm giving him a face here. I still don't know what he looked like, but I'm just guessing. And he enlisted like 4 different times. So we've gone, this is great. This is a big jump. We've gone from this one gravestone that I keep coming back to in the cemetery in my hometown. And that one little detail that's recorded on his grave leads us to a book that gives us this much detail, right? The specific dates and places of his service. And then beyond that, well, Glenn cites his sources. So then the next stage is going into those sources. And that's where, oh my goodness, I get chills because that's where it gets really interesting. So I'm going to stop here. I think I have a whole other page I penciled out this morning. So I'll be working on that. Just so 2 things, so you know where this is going. I'm taking all these pages, putting them together into a printable so that then you can print it out, fold it up as a 1 sheet, and read through it as a book, right? So that's my goal here, and I'll have multiple issues of this as the project goes on. The other thing is, remember tonight, we're reading from Sharjah Sketchbook, talking about this process of diary comics, in this case, drawing diary comics in the United Arab Emirates, and meeting people at the Arab world's largest book fair, and teaching with kids from all around the world and drawing comics together. And this was just a mind-blowing trip, and I can't wait to, we'll be reading from that book tonight. So there's a post down below, I think. I'll post it again. All right, I'm going to go in and do some inking. I'll scan this in and drop in the book cover here, and then we'll have 2 more pages for the second issue here. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. Have a wonderful, what is it, Tuesday. Have a wonderful week, and we'll be back sometime soon with more live inking and stuff. If you want to get the Comics Camp scoop, head on over to merrickbennett.com or patreon.com/merrickbennett. You can become a patron, get all the special surprises in the mail and stuff like that. All right, cool. Have a good day, everybody.